Andrew, could you describe the soils in the areas you were experimenting, and could you comment on if the soils were of a different sort, how your results might differ?
Is that on? Oh yeah. Yeah, if you know Florida, it's a beach, the whole thing. At both sites, it was a sort of quite a coarse, loamy sand. Yes, I would expect the results to change in different climates, and different soil types, and again with the different species as well. Yeah, I don't know how they would change. It needs more experimentation if anybody wants to do that study. But yeah, they would certainly differ.
Thank you. Any other questions? Right up at the... Ooh, we've got 3. Furthest back, please.
No.
Yeah. So ice cream, but don't lick it, please.
Right. Martin, do you think sustainable urban drainage systems are going to have any effect on subsidence?
Simple answer, probably not. Because it's unlikely that any excess surface water is going to be directed underneath a building. And even if it is, trees are going to find that very nice and are going to suck it all out. So if you don't have any excess water going to the soil, roots will still be there, sucking out whatever water is available, and so it could exacerbate subsidence problems. So no, I don't think it's going to help.
Okay, was someone down the front, was it? Simon, did you say? Okay, great. Ice cream, please. It's not working.
This is intended more to sort of stimulate thought, and also following Sir William's message this morning, that in a rural setting, I feel as though arboriculture is not so much a hot topic. Ted Green commented yesterday that lone trees are really capable of capturing carbon, often more than trees located in woodland. Carbon zero by 2050. There's certainly funding available for establishment of new woodland on farmland. Giving up profitable area or pasture land to this, though, shouldn't we be carefully incentivising the planting and care of lone trees on farmland? Wouldn't landowners looking to add capital value to their land not fly at a lone tree grant scheme? I feel we could then use stipulation in that grant to share best practice to landowners. For example, Andrew's research with compaction around existing trees in farmland. If you've got any comments or...
Is your question at anyone in particular, or just...
No, well, I more to Sir William, really.
Okay.
And anybody that wishes to
gone.
sort of pursue that.
Do the panel want to comment on that? I'm sure there are other people in the audience who would want to comment on that.
Can the AA take that question to Sir William when they see him?
Yeah. Simon, did you get that? You've got a job to do. Okay, John, you've got the green box?
Yeah, I'm not going to lick it. This
don't.
is a question for Phil. Phil, thanks for your talk this morning. Some really nice examples of crown reduction pruning. In one of your examples, you showed us a Pinus strobus, which you felt required load reduction, and you made some load reduction and you thinned it, and you told us that the thinning would reduce the drag coefficient. But you also felt it necessary to install, you said, 2 dynamic cable systems. And I'm interested to know how you were able to calculate the tension in an elastic cable when you're tying together 2 stem sections which could typically move apart by as much as a metre or a metre and a half, and the difference between the maximum straining compression and rupture of the wood fibre is only about 1%. So I'm interested how you calculated the load and tension in the dynamic cable, because I can't figure it out.
Well, it's a great question, John. But what I tried to point out in my presentation is that tree pulling tests and statics and that type of analysis is what informed some of my approaches, but I didn't use it. We don't use it in all cases, and so in that case, we didn't do any kind of analysis. It's reflections on what we knew, and the first thing is that a Pinus strobus is almost always a single stem tree, so having any kind of union in it is already potentially problematic. Second thing was, when we look at risk assessment, we have to look at target, and this tree was 2 meters away from the house. So actually the cabling was more of a fail-safe mechanism, and there was no tension on the cables. They were installed in more of a slack fashion, so as not to impede any of the compensation that the tree was doing on its own. So it was sort of just a, it wasn't a.
So there's just there to catch it if it broke then?
Yeah, it's a fail-safe mechanism basically.
Okay, thank you.
There was someone else in front of John that had a hand up.
Is that
Ice
working? Yeah. My question is for Sir William as well. So, but given that we're going to pass the questions on to him, I'll ask it. It's to do with the duty of local authorities to consult their communities. I'm just concerned really that the extra duty on local authorities could be counterproductive if it diverts kind of tree officer resource, which we all know is quite limited, away from other tree officer type activities. So I just wanted to ask that question and ask Sir William if there were additional resources that were kind of earmarked, particularly as a duty, not a power, but a duty in legislation.
Okay. We can pass that on. I see the royal we.
Hi, Jim Smith here from Forest Commission. I think I can answer that for you. DEFRA will be making additional funds available to local authorities. Now, one of the criticisms was, will that filter down to tree officers? We don't, that's the intention, but had Sir William been here, he would have said, yes, they will be making resources available.
Thank you. There's two questions here, sorry. Behind you, someone, okay. And there's someone behind, please, with a black shirt. Can you stick your hand up? Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I know this isn't really directed at you, but you seem to know something about it. Do you know roughly how much is going to be aimed at local authorities? I mean, are we expecting 1 hour a week, an additional member of staff to handle the load? I know most of the local authorities had the opportunity to comment on the onus that's now being put on us. And I know there's limitations to it, and that it's only meant to be on dead and dying trees that we don't have to. But I feel that there's now going to be impetus for us to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these trees need to come out, as opposed to just a generic risk-based assessment on urban trees.
There was some calculations done within DEFRA and looking at just that, about what the costs would be. And there's further work being done at the moment as to whether or not DEFRA, because this was you may be aware that this was challenged quite strongly by DCLG, who didn't want to put an additional burden on local authorities. But it was, it's gone. We are where we are with it. And DEFRA are currently looking at further work to see whether or not they should be providing additional funding when they when the impacts on local authorities are actually recognised, practically speaking. So that's a work in progress at the moment. But I can't put a figure on it, I'm afraid. So.
Thank you. And the gentleman behind.
Are we working? Oh yeah, here we are. I actually have two hopefully very brief questions, so apologies everyone. My first question is for Martin. I just wanted to know whether in your experience there were any instances where remedial works had been carried out to the superstructure, i.e. underpinning, and the tree was retained and cyclically pruned or something sort of done to it. Whether that's happened in your experience and what the outcome was. The second, hopefully very brief question was to Paul, just in terms of the models that you've been applying in your experience, really just to gauge your experiences on how utility network providers are approaching tree risk and sort of quantifying the risk of failure. I know there have been approaches to achieving network resilience by blanket treatments, i.e. removing trees next to power lines to eliminate the risk. And really whether you feel something better could be done in your experience to achieve that, a sort of more pragmatic approach to retaining more trees. Thanks.
Well, you try and remember your question while I'm trying to remember and answer mine. My understanding was you were asking about underpinning. So there are two options when it comes to subsidence remedial measures. Deal with the cause, which is the tree, or deal with the symptom, which is the subsidence. And if you're dealing with the symptom, that means deepening foundations so that they're below the zone of soil drying. So if you're going to do underpinning and deepen the foundations, there's no need to do anything to the tree. So you can keep the tree. I was talking to a loss adjuster yesterday who wants me to go and look at some trees, and he's saying, I'm not quite sure why insurance companies have moved away from underpinning as a matter of course, which they did do in the early 90s. And maybe we should be encouraging insurance companies to live up to their responsibilities and underpin more buildings so that trees can stay. But the move has been towards controlling the cause, the tree, as opposed to the symptom. So, but if you're going to underpin to stabilise the building, the tree can stay, no need to prune. Hope that answers the question.
You need to talk to Dave Hansford. I presented at I got invited to present at the Utility Arb conference, and I learned about the storm resilience protocol. And Dave Hansford was working for Highline and was being asked by Western Power to survey trees, and the only prescription was fell. And I mean, he didn't need to take this approach, but thought that's unreasonable and sought out ways of, well, how can we give them better advice than just fell, because those trees were often not theirs, so they had a lot of clashes with the owners of the trees who were having this management regime imposed on them. And we did a lot of static load tests for Western Power and showed them that they didn't need to fell any of those trees. We used a 1 in 100 year storm rather than a 1 in 50 because they were more risk averse, and the outcome of an outage was millions of pounds worth of fines. And we did ourselves out of a job because Dave Hansford started looking at these trees and thinking, I don't need to get these tested because just like when you use QTRA, you stop using QTRA because you can make a very quick assessment of risk.
Any final questions? Neville, here at the front.
Just a quickie for Andrew. On the basis, in knowing the UK, being in New Zealand, having gone to Florida, having done your tests, and knowing the BS 837, would you then say that the recommended RPA should be 12 times DBA or 15 times DBA?
No pressure.
I knew that question would come up. Don't do it. So, the 12 times thing, do you know where that came from? Nowhere? As far as I can make out, the 12 times DBH thing, the earliest record I can find of this is in a paper by a guy called Hamilton from the late 80s, and he refers to a convenient rule of thumb being 1 foot of tree protection radius for every 1 inch of diameter, trunk diameter. And that just seems, it was a rule of thumb, and it just seems to have been carried through. And I think in most instances it probably works, but to my knowledge, I'm the only person that's ever really asked the question. Different species of different age classes will respond differently to that in different climates. Personally, because I'm still a consultant, I'm still working, personally that's what I'm doing, just based on what I've seen. But I would encourage anyone to do any more research on that exact topic. And if we can get some more information about how different species respond to that kind of thing in different environments, we can make a more informed decision, and you could get a more explicit answer to your question, I think.
Yeah. Supplementary, then, as yours is the only piece of evidence we've got, would you say we can rely on that better than the rule of thumb?
I would always rely on empirical evidence than a rule of thumb. Yeah.
One final question just behind you there.
That's also a question to the root person.
Leave me alone.
Another way to determine the root protection zone is to take the drip line and add a meter or two. Based on your experience and observation, how does this perform? And would you or not recommend it?
I don't like the drip line thing. If you look at a lot of the research, and this all comes down to allometry and tree scaling, and John talked about that yesterday, and so that's kind of where I was sort of steering it with my my tree protection radius thing. A lot of my thesis is really based on like tree allometry and how that scales. What I didn't show you, I'd had some more trees at that site, and I had another treatment that used the drip line, but it just messed up. It didn't fit. The results were just all over the place, and the reason being is because the crown sizes were so different. So I wouldn't rely on the drip line, is the answer to the question. I'd be more inclined to use an allometric scaling thing based on DBH.
Thank you. I think we'll just have to call it a day there. Please do take